Hi, my name is Gigi Gucci and we're here in Hawaii. Today we're going to talk about the intestinal phase of digestion. Before we do that, let's take a look at this diagram and see if we can find where some of these things are. So first of all, we're going to see the big brown thing, which is the liver. And behind the liver, you're going to see this green thing kind of peeking out. And it's always in green for whatever reason. And that green thing peeking out is called the gallbladder. The gallbladder sits behind the liver and has a little duct that comes down and meets up with this little C-shaped pink tube here, which is the duodenum. The duodenum happens to be the very first part of the small intestine. It is where the intestinal phase happens. It's where all the magic of the ending of digestion, or most of the ending of digestion, happens. This beige organ here is called the pancreas. And the pancreas has its little tail here sitting right inside the duodenum, and the pancreas has its own duct that travels into the duodenum. So the gallbladder has a duct leading into the duodenum, as does the pancreas. On your own body, if you were to take your heel of your hand and put it on the seam of your shirt and kind of wrap that hand around, your hand is actually on your liver, like it is in this picture here. And you can see this picture is kind of spread out. So the duodenum is sitting a little bit lower than it normally would be. But if you put your hand here, you're going to notice that you're roughly in the area of the duodenum. If you put your hand on the seam of your shirt and kind of where your fingers are, that's where it's happening here. So the intestinal phase has two main components. The first component would be neural and the second is hormonal. So we'll talk about the neural phase first. The neural phase of the intestinal phase of digestion happens when we're looking at this diagram, if you can kind of imagine a stomach sitting here, and that stomach is going to squeeze its contents and push them into the duodenum. As it pushes into the duodenum, this is a tube, right? So when the foodstuffs get in here, that duodenum is going to kind of stretch. Well, that stretch is going to signal stretch receptors that are in the walls of the duodenum. That stretch receptors that are being elicited there elicit a reflex called the enterogastric reflex. And the enterogastric reflex mainly goes back to the stomach and says, hey, we've got enough stuff in here right now. Can you slow down your process and allow us to finish ours over here? So the stomach sort of slows down and the duodenum then can do what it needs to do inside its walls there. So that is the enterogastric reflex, and the neural aspect of it allows for efficient action, absorption, digestion, secretion in the duodenum. Then the hormonal aspect of the duodenum is a little more lengthy. Several hormones involved here. The foodstuffs coming from the stomach and going into the duodenum are called chyme, C-H-Y-M-E. And it's all the kind of mushed up stuff that comes from the stomach. Well, the stomach in and of itself has a high content of hydrochloric acid, and that acid comes along with the chyme, and as it enters into the duodenum, it can really irritate the inside lining of the duodenum because the mucus layer in the duodenum isn't anywhere near as thick as it is in the stomach. So the first thing that's going to happen is we're going to stimulate the release of a hormone called enterocrinin. So remember we said we had neural and hormonal. So this would be the first part of the hormonal phase. So enterocrinin talks to the cells inside the duodenum and says, hey, can you release a little more mucus, because what we need to do is protect the inside lining. So that's what enterocrinin talks to the epithelial cells of the duodenum. They release mucus and help protect the inside lining of the duodenum. Acids are going to cause more than one hormone to be released. One of them is secretin. And secretin is a hormone that is going to travel to the pancreas and cause it to act as hormones do. Hormones travel to their target organ through the blood and then stimulate that organ to act. So secretin is going to travel over here to the pancreas and say, hey, we've got an acid situation in the duodenum. Is there anything you can do to help us out? So the pancreas says, oh, sure, I'll send you some bicarbonate. And so the bicarbonate travels down the pancreatic duct into the duodenum and helps buffer that acid. But the pancreas says, hey, I'll do you one better, and I'll send you the rest of my whole digestive enzymes that will help you finish up your process. So a full load of digestive enzymes are going to come from the pancreas. So we call those the pancreatic juices, and they end up in the duodenum. When the foodstuffs, the chyme, actually comes into the duodenum, it's going to have fats, carbohydrates, proteins, nucleic acids, and of course the acid that we already talked about. So when those lipids enter into the duodenum, they're going to stimulate another hormone, and that hormone is cholecystokinin. And cholecystokinin, or CCK, will also travel in the blood, and it's going to travel in the blood and it's going to go up to the gallbladder. It's going to talk to the gallbladder and say, hey, we've got a lot of lipids in the duodenum. What can you do to help us out? And so the gallbladder says, oh, I'll send you my bile. And so the bile then travels down the bile duct into the duodenum, and as it enters into the duodenum, it actually helps buffer some of that hydrochloric acid coming from the stomach also. But its main job is to emulsify the lipids or fats. And what that means is it's going to take the lipids that have come from the stomach into the duodenum and break them down into tiny, tiny, tiny little pieces, which is emulsification. That allows the lipids to be absorbed into the bloodstream through the lacteals that are in the duodenum. We'll talk about that in a minute. We have another hormone called gastric inhibitory peptide, and that basically does exactly what it says. Gastric means stomach, inhibit, to stop, peptide. And so this is going to go up to the stomach, which you're imagining here, and tell the stomach, hey, again, we've got enough going on, slow down so that we can really finish this appropriately. Because what we want to have happen here is we want to make sure that those macronutrients are going to be broken down all the way into their monomers. So the lipids, carbohydrates, proteins, and nucleic acids get broken down into the monomers. They're going to be able to be digested more completely. We have another hormone, of course, one more, the vasoactive intestinal peptide. And vasoactive intestinal peptide is secreted from the epithelial cells of the duodenum. This is going to be released into the lumen of the duodenum to, again, ensure proper digestion of all the foodstuffs. So we had a full load of pancreatic digestive enzymes that would digest fats, carbohydrates, proteins, and nucleic acids. We had the bile coming from the gallbladder, and the epithelial cells of the duodenum are going to release their own full load of digestive enzymes that are going to digest fats, carbohydrates, proteins, and nucleic acids. The vasoactive intestinal peptide does one more thing, very important aspect here. The protein enzymes that come from the pancreas are going to travel down this pancreatic duct, and as they do that, the pancreatic duct itself is made of protein. So if they were released in an active form, then they would digest the pancreatic duct, which is not what we want. So we need to release them in an inactive form, which is called a proenzyme. So as they travel down, they are in the form of a proenzyme. They get into the duodenum, and the vasoactive intestinal peptide causes the epithelial cells of the duodenum to do something, and that is to kind of slough off, as epithelial cells do. And as they slough off, they are going to release enteropeptidase. So this is not a hormone because it ends in ASE. ASE is going to mean an enzyme. And so enteropeptidase then is going to activate all those proenzymes that came from the duodenum and came from the pancreas, and the duodenum, and allow them to become active. And as they become active, they can then start their protein digestion. As they start their, or finish the rest of the protein digestion, that digestion then allows all of the foodstuffs that entered into the duodenum as chyme is now broken down into the monomers to allow it to be absorbed into the blood vessels of the duodenum. And that is the intestinal phase of digestion. Thank you.